Okay, so Ardoq, you fairly recently published the Emerging Technology Adoption 2024 report.
Mm.
The obvious place to start would be, was there a particular high-level finding, or what was the main finding or findings?
I mean, the findings I think were pretty consistent with what we expected, but me personally, I was quite surprised by kind of the uncertainty that CIOs are willing to admit in this space. I mean, only about half really expected to have measurable benefit from the tests that they're doing right now, especially around AI. And that, I mean, that is pretty consistent with what we see in emerging tech. But the what surprised me was that only 61% or so, or over 60% effectively, were motivated by this kind of fear of missing out. And that to me is kind of shocking. I know it's like a really fast moving space and really uncertain in a lot of different applications on how this technology could be adopted. But that kind of high level of uncertainty driving fear is to make decisions is what I thought was quite shocking as a headline finding in this report.
Yeah, and in terms of sort of drilling down a little bit, I believe you sort of uncovered a difficulty in getting, well, perceived difficulty in getting the balance right between the risk and the reward of emerging tech. I guess AI would be a classic example of that. So people kind of want to do it, but they're also, if not terrified, at least wary of what might happen if it doesn't go well. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. I mean, and it's kind of like this two-part problem, right? So it's, this is not the first time we've had a really potentially disruptive technology that's going to transform every way we think about every business and every industry. I mean, we did this with the dot-com boom. We did this with mobile. This is not the first time this has been around. But I think this one is especially interesting because the risk versus reward, we have the past to look at and know that if you don't move, you can be left behind. But at the same time, the speed right now, I think, is insane. So you have this risk of like, what if I don't do anything or not enough fast enough? Not to mention all the other risks around AI when it comes to things like ethics or, responsible use or data privacy and how you actually inform these models. So there's a whole plethora of kind of newer amplified risks around the AI space, especially, which is really making that balancing act challenging.
And in terms of AI and other, I guess, emerging technologies, there's no doubt people see them as, a game changer if it goes right. But I think they all admit that compared to, shall we say, established technology projects, the failure rate or the lack of success, whichever way you want to put it, is quite marked. So I suppose what they're saying is they, if not expecting, they've got to be ready to understand that things might fail a bit more than with some tried and tested tech. Is it what's going on there, I suppose?
Yeah. So, the success rate, you have to be willing to put in some money, and unfortunately with these spaces, it's almost a coin toss to see whether or not it's going to give you any kind of measurable impact. And I think what's really adding to that uncertainty here is both the speed of the development, but also the understanding of how to apply it to the business. So if organizations can really understand their own core business and the services that they provide and really understand those, then they might be positioned to change that success rate. And I think the ones that are really hopeful are the ones that feel like they're starting to get a grasp of not just the technology, but what that really means to how it transforms either the products or services they provide, right? And then that makes them quite hopeful that they'll be in the forefront of the market. But of course, it's kind of a race right now to see who can understand that and apply it appropriately and start measuring that kind of success.
Yeah, and in terms of AI specifically, you mentioned at the top, I think the fear of missing out, which is sort of driving people, or at least causing. But I think also you mentioned about the moral dimension. I'll be intrigued as to how sort of important people feel that is in terms of AI. And finally, I think you uncovered in the report a bit about AI wash as well. So perhaps you can summarize as best you can the sort of what's going on with AI. What are some of the challenges around it for people?
Right. So the two parts there. One is, you hear about your market or your industry and your competitors adopting this because obviously there's a huge marketing buzz around it. So everybody that you're either competing against or working with is trying to leverage this. So that's really stoking this fear of missing out. But also, at least what I see, especially when I'm speaking with our customers, because they often question us, like, when you guys talk about AI, are you talking about this purely as marketing buzz? Or is there any kind of is there any kind of sustenance to this? And the AI washing thing is really getting on people's radars quickly. And that's adding to the pressure to make sure that it's kind of targeted and purposeful applications of AI to the business, and then being able to back that up. But then they hit this moral dimension as well. So you have, for some industries, a real sensitivity to this, right? Like if you work in a creative industry in IT, and your employees, their colleagues are creatives, there's probably a higher likelihood that they are extremely fearful of this taking some of their more creative jobs, right? So you have this kind of employee responsibility and understanding, like, is this going to make you more efficient, or is this going to replace you? So you have a bit of a battle there to manage the application of AI internally, which is part of the moral aspect. Then you have like the ethics and kind of sustainability part of this. I think one thing that's been left off the docket that hasn't been really discussed is all of this technology is consuming an immense amount of energy, right? The amount of processing that goes into just creating a fun little image that you kind of prompt the AI to build is insane. And that energy is coming from somewhere and is costing society, right? So having good plans, and I've seen some companies that actually have built kind of ethical policies on the application of AI to make sure people aren't using it for non-value adding tasks to reduce that overall footprint. And then, of course, you have the privacy side of this, right? Which is another part of the moral pressure, where making sure that you're not misusing either your customer or employee information. And that is obviously a huge risk, both commercially, from a compliance standards perspective, especially here in Europe. This is a big touching point. But then also just under control. So there's the fear is, if I don't know where my data is and why we have it and what we can use it for, bringing AI into the equation opens that likelihood of accidentally inappropriately using it, just goes through the roof. So you have all these dimensions on both ethics and morals and responsibility that are really forcing CIOs into a tight position, and kind of a nerve-wracking one, because at the one hand they have speed and fear motivating action, and then on the other side you have the consequence, which could be many different phases.
And as a result, I think the report suggests that emerging technologies implementations, if you like, are certainly not for the faint-hearted. So what would you advise, thoughts or advice as to how people go about it, bearing in mind some of the things I guess we've discussed?
Right. So back to the point on the data side, if you already don't feel like you have good control over your estate, whether that's the data you have, the systems you use, the processes you depend on in order to operate your business, adding AI into that prematurely is going to make it really kind of anxiety driven. It's going to cause a lot of challenges. So I think the best thing to reduce that fear, improve the likelihood for success, is to make sure that they have the right things in place to structure these critical bits of information and knowledge about their business, so that they can really targeted make improvements and understand the impact of those changes. And this is a space that we've been really passionate about for a long time at Ardoq, where we're not necessarily trying to build a tool for one specific domain called enterprise architecture. We're trying to build a tool that allows decision makers to really navigate those sensitive and complex decisions and strategies with a higher sense of accuracy and a little bit more data informed. Because I mean, if it's always done by gut feel, which is what one of the findings was in this report, is that there's a lot of gut feel kind of motivation and strategy, then you're putting yourself at undue risk. So yeah, bringing data to it, I think, is the best way to reduce that risk and uncertainty, and make it a bit more approachable, even for those that might be in a sensitive situation.
And I think the report also refers to ROI expectations, perhaps being, not putting undue pressure, I guess, on the return. And also, I'm imagining that there's potentially some baggage. People have tried various stuff in the past and it maybe hasn't worked. So there's the nervousness around that. So just, I suppose, thoughts as to how people can overcome or address those types of things.
Absolutely. So I think what we saw with the kind of low expectations on ROI kind of shows how early we are in the cycle of this emerging technology. People are willing to do high risk experiments with low likelihoods of returns, which is a good thing. You have to have the right mindset. Otherwise, I think you're going to be quite disappointed, because we are quite immature in understanding how we can really leverage this as a global market of technology adopters. But we also know that 70% of digital transformation projects in general fail, or at least fail to hit their targets. So, we understand that this is a complex space, and the ROI is not going to be just kind of a financial metric that we can predictably hit. So we need to have some control of that application, that process, to improve that ROI. Which means if we're failing at least to hit our targets at that high rate, so the success rate is not really great, we know that we're taking big risk and big bets. Anything we can do to try to change those metrics just by a few percentage points is going to have a massive impact for the organization and for basically the world as a whole. If you think about the number of projects that are running in any given organization, that's a huge amount of money. So just by improving that success rate a little bit, by having good data, good understanding of where they can make smart applications of this technology, is going to really change, I think, the trajectory of companies and development, but also hopefully the ROI metrics as well.
And in terms of, I think you referenced a little while ago, enterprise architecture, the importance of, and it might seem surprising, but are you suggesting that for a lot of people, they want to go with an emerging technology project, and they kind of forget, or only when they bump into a bottleneck do they think, oh, our enterprise architecture might need a bit of upgrade or whatever? I mean, that sounds a bit surprising, but is that what's happening? So people think, yeah, we'll go for AI, and then suddenly realize their servers aren't up to the task or whatever it is. What's going on there?
Absolutely. So what we've seen in this industry is that enterprise architecture is often treated as kind of a later stage operational implementation detail, right? And our mission has always been to change that perspective, reposition those individuals, and kind of shift them left in the process, make them part of the strategy process so that we can reduce the likelihood of failure. Because what typically happens is that executives go to a conference, or they see some emerging technology, they come back, they say, we're going to do cloud, or we're going to implement AI or something like that, without really understanding the implications of that decision or that strategy. And again, motivated basically by the buzz of the industry. And so then the EAs get the decision and then have to retrofit that to an organization that maybe isn't really mature or ready to do that. So then you're basically operating with a false narrative on the cost benefit analysis. And so what we think needs to change to really improve those metrics is the entire idea of what this space, this domain of enterprise architecture does and how you can leverage them. If they can be part of the evaluation and strategic application of this technology to new areas of business, they can actually have a huge impact on navigating the risk and the likelihood of returns. But to do that, they need to have data. They need to have collaboration across the organization. They can't just be an IT function worrying about, drawing boxes and arrows. It really needs to be a data-informed and strategic kind of consultative role. And until we have that change of working, I think these decisions are being made, honestly, kind of blind, shooting from the hip, and not with a really good cost-benefit analysis of the reality of your organization. So I would advocate highly for really rethinking the role. Maybe don't call it enterprise architecture even, but bring that data about how your company operates to these discussions so that you can actually, hopefully, improve your hit rate. Again, just even by a marginal percentage would be a huge return.
Collaboration talked about. I don't know if in the report you'd say something specifically, or just your own sort of thoughts on that. One gets the impression, it's been talked about a lot, that companies are beginning to do it. Is that what you're finding, or are we still quite a long way? We still have these silos of people doing stuff, and therefore, to your point earlier, the whole isn't working in the same direction as efficiently as it could be.
So I think this is a little bit outside of the scope of the report, but in an area that we have a lot of exposure to, and have formulated a pretty strong opinion on kind of the current state of affairs. I think the organizations that are really succeeding have made the transition from looking at IT as a support function and cost bucket to really positioning them as drivers of business value, right? And this has been something that's been happening for literally decades, but we're finally seeing truly the transformation happen in organizational culture and design. And even more so now, that kind of collaboration is extremely critical when we look at something like AI. AI has made an extremely complex technology and concept that was, previously reserved for the scientists and the researchers that have been applying AI to models and predictions for, decades. Gen AI has made it available to every business person at their fingertips on their mobile phone, right? So you have this unique situation where technology no longer is kind of a privileged thing for only the people who understand it. It's become something that every individual has access to, and then can get quite creative to how can this help me in my job, whether that's a salesperson doing research on the company they're about to cold call, or whether it's a business building an entirely new automated service for their customers. I mean, the scope is huge, right? But every individual can start to do that creative process. And if they don't have good collaboration with their IT organization, with their IT leadership, and with the architects, they really risk this just blowing up into a bunch of very different types of tests and experiments with very different undefined goals, and not really being able to kind of filter through the noise, identify what works for the business, what makes sense, and also reduce the surface area for risk, right? I mean, there's stories already of customers having their data leaked because commercial people popped it into ChatGPT, right? I mean, like this kind of stuff is going to happen unless you have good governance and good control. But it's kind of this weird relationship between, if you have too much policy, too much governance, you're going to miss the boat. So you need to be agile, you need to be flexible, you need to set a culture for adoption of technology responsibly. And I think really positioning both the IT leadership and the architects in the position to be part of that discussion is going to really accelerate that speed. And anytime that they're in a position just to say no, that's when the company should be really concerned about how are they leveraging IT. If they're just a naysayer, always shutting down opportunity, then the collaboration is going to fall and we're going to be left behind. So I think collaboration right now is even more of an essence for success because, you need to be able to do this intelligently, but at speed.
Okay, and maybe just in wrapping up, any final thoughts in terms of the emerging technology in the project? Obviously, you've mentioned quite a lot of stuff. Are there one or two key bits of advice you'd give to people as they either assess an opportunity or embark on it? The crucial things that they need to be aware of.
I think the number one thing is always be really outcome driven. Like, have an idea of what you're trying to achieve and try to measure it at all times. And we didn't see this in our own experiments internally. Like, if you just do it for the sake of doing it, it's not going to add a lot of value. And I think there's going to be a lot of waste in playing with AI across every business. I think also this is a huge opportunity to kind of get your house in order, right? A lot of organizations, and unfortunately a scary amount of organizations, don't have a true understanding of how their business operates from business to IT. It's completely siloed, and there's a lot of black boxes. And if you start to use this as an opportunity to get some of that control in order, you're not going to get a full picture ever. That's a dream state. But just getting the basics in place is going to open up entirely new opportunities. So we see examples where, customers really they see the opportunity to leverage AI. So the first thing they do is they start to look at, okay, what kind of unique data sets do we have in our business? And are those unique data sets in the state that we can leverage them to create unique products for the market? But that's an architectural decision discussion you should have the answer to already. And if you don't, this is the perfect opportunity to get those things in order. And the great thing about doing that is if you do it with that business context and that outcome drive, you also then see additional benefits in an ROI. So it's not just this like, oh, we need to get control because the auditors are coming or we want to maintain some certification or something, which is just cost and it has no business value. So you're always going to do it kind of at a minimum level necessary. But this allows you to do it right, and then probably also open up entirely new opportunities that you didn't even know were feasible that you already have locked up in your organization's potential. So I really see this as an opportunity. And I think every CIO should seize this moment, use it to drive better insights and controls so they can be better aligned with the business, and just be targeted, be very much outcome driven.
Okay, it's been great to chat to you. Some great information from the report and your own sort of observations on what's going on. So really appreciate your time. Thanks
Likewise,
very much.
Thanks for taking the time. And I was, again, pretty shocked by the numbers in the report. There seems to be a lot of majority here. It's not just small percentages we're talking about. So I hope it was insightful.
I suppose the good news there is people, because as you say, fear of missing out, maybe people don't need to be quite so worried that they're missing the boat just yet.
No, I think we're all in the same state. I think everybody is kind of I wouldn't say floundering, but definitely circling around the potential. And there's might be obviously a few leaders that have really seized that opportunity. But I think the reality is the ship hasn't sailed, and we all have a place to get on board if we get our house in order.
Okay, well, thanks again. Thanks, Ian.
Thank you. Have a great day, Philip.